We're a double-sided business in as much as we have our heat partnerships, and we must manage those relationships because they are essentially joint ventures between ourselves and our heat hosts. And then we also have our clients, and we sell through intermediate channels. So we have to manage those relationships, and then we will have to manage our clients who are sort of whose other paper they might have contracted upon. We still have a responsibility to be working with them, particularly with things like ESG reporting and the wonderful stories that are being generated by the data centers. So from a day-to-day perspective, I think this will be less obviously recognizable as marketing, and it will be about relationship management across a sort of a spectrum of different stakeholders. Hi there, my name is Matt Bagwell. I am the Chief Marketing Officer of Deep Green, and I'm here today talking with Joshua from Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, it's Joshua Feinberg, host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, and I'm thrilled to welcome a very special guest with me here today. I'm welcoming Matt Bagwell, who is the Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Sustainability Officer of Deep Green in the UK. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Joshua. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thank you for agreeing to come on and share your decades of wisdom in and around technology and talk about some of the really cool things that you're doing with Deep Green. So I'm super curious to give our viewers, to give our listeners a little bit of perspective on how you've ended up in this place where you're leading marketing and sustainability for a company that's doing something so innovative in the data center ecosystem. Was this something that you thought about along the way in your career? Had you always thought back when you were in high school, when you were growing up, that you wanted to be in some kind of technology leadership role, or were there certain paths along the way that led to this?
It's a great question, Joshua. How long have we got? I mean, it's been a lifetime to get here. I think that there's some part of this which is accidental, and then there's some part of it that's quite deliberate. So my career has always been in marketing, whether that's branding, whether that's customer experience, whether it's what people may recognize as advertising. So I've always been a storyteller, whether that is digital products or whether it is advertising. It's always been about stories. And I've done that for many different types of brands across pretty much every vertical. But this, Deep Green is incredibly different. It is a infrastructure, design, build, and operator of data centers. And if you'd asked me 5 years ago whether I was going to be working for a data center company, if you had asked if I was going to be, the answer would have been probably not. But it was an incredible opportunity. It brings together an understanding of energy and what that means, infrastructure, community, climate, and technology. We're at the forefront of, I guess, AI and high performance compute data centers. So it's a perfect marriage of all of these different interest areas. I'm still storytelling because I think that's what differentiates Deep Green from some of the people who have gone before us. So yeah, not deliberate to end up in a technology company, Joshua, nor necessarily in a data center company particularly, but fortuitous because it's a powerful story.
What's really interesting, as well as within the data center ecosystem, lots of people, I would say tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands at this point, have heard about the innovative positioning that you came up with for Deep Green, the data center and the swimming pool. Can you walk us through a little bit about how that process all unfolded?
So this is really sort of weird science in someone's shed. And there is a shed, and there is a radiator, a small computer, and a bath full of oil in Mark Bjornskard's, the founder's shed. And he started to work on this concept about 8 years ago, knowing that CPUs and GPUs generate an awful lot of heat energy, 98% of which can be recaptured. And so he was creating prototypes, in his back garden 8 years ago. But as a go-to-market, it started as an organization called Heater, which was a joint venture with British Gas, one of our foremost energy providers here in the UK. And then Mark wanted to scale that concept. Heater still exists and is a wonderful company. They make tiny, tiny data centers that sit alongside domestic hot water tanks in people's homes. It's a beautiful idea. Mark wanted to scale that, hence brought a prototype to market as Deep Green. In that instance, that was a 50 kilowatt unit sat beside a swimming pool. So in a sense, it was just a scaling of what was in his shed, but it was a hopeful idea. And I think it just was incredibly visceral, Joshua. People understood that in the UK particularly, swimming pools are really cold, notoriously, brutally cold. Everybody has sort of a visceral memory of that experience. And understand that computers get warm, and it seems like an obvious symbiotic relationship. So the prototype just became a really good story that everybody understood. Most people do not understand infrastructure. They do not necessarily really understand what a data center is, but this was really tangible. And the benefit just seemed to make sense. People will literally say to us, well, why doesn't everybody do that? There's lots of reasons. I'm sure we can cover why people don't do it. But it just made common sense. And as such, I think it caught the imagination. It's a good news story in a world where, oftentimes data centers are seen as pariahs of energy. They consume an awful lot of power. They may potentially consume an awful lot of water. They are black boxes in industrial estates. No one really understands what's in them, but they don't sense that they're particularly positive as part of the community. That may not be true, but I think that by Deep Green being a bit more transparent about what we were trying to do and being purpose-driven, it just caught the zeitgeist and the imagination.
Yeah, even for people that don't know what a data center is, everyone can relate to a cold swimming pool. And anyone that's ever put a swimming pool in their backyard, had the same issue in the US. I grew up in the suburbs of New York City. Okay. And in the 1980s, it was presumably quite expensive to heat a swimming pool unless it was an indoor pool. I live in South Florida now, where probably 8-9 months of the year you wouldn't need a heater, but even people that get a heater, it's a novelty that you really enjoy the first couple of years until you see the utility bill for what it costs to heat a swimming pool during the winter. So some people have experimented with solar. Gas is less expensive than electric, but everyone can relate to the concept of being in a freezing cold swimming pool.
Yeah, and it's actually what I think has unfolded across the course of the last 12 months particularly is that it's now very obvious to our clients why this is beneficial. It is genuinely a symbiotic relationship between a body of cold water and a data center that needs to be cooled. It's actually very simple thermodynamics. Well, I say relatively simple. Building these things is not simple, but the technology is relatively straightforward. But it is a beautiful relationship. And the pools can be warmer, and we can save hundreds of thousands of dollars or hundreds and thousands of pounds of heat energy bills and carbon. So people can swim in warmer water. We get essentially free cooling, and that is a material benefit to our clients. So it's a win-win-win, planet, people, and our clients, cost efficiency.
It changes the discussion too around site selection and the real estate part of data centers, because all of a sudden now, instead of looking for big open areas where you can build a huge hyperscale facility, it makes a lot more sense to place a data center next to a residential or commercial project that can benefit from the heat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we are operating what you would recognize as edge or distributed data centers. They are between a megawatt and say 20 megawatts, as opposed to say 50 megawatts or beyond for a hyperscaler. But absolutely true. We are looking to co-locate with public spaces like swimming pools, but not exclusively swimming pools, district heating systems, which are increasingly important for our energy strategy in the UK as we move towards the electrification of, say, heat in our homes, heat in industry, and then several different off-takers. We talk about industrial ecologies, Joshua, here, which is a fancy way of sort of saying we really should think in a systems way of how to bring different things together rather than just sort of like a point-to-point solution. I hope that in time, the hyperscalers will similarly consider the proximity of their developments with people who can take the energy. It should become the de facto way of people building.
What's really interesting is most of the innovation that I hear around this topic is happening in Europe, and very little of it is happening in the US. And I've bounced this off of a few people that focus on sustainability in Europe, and there doesn't seem to be any easy answers. Is Deep Green working primarily in the UK, or do you have aspirations to grow beyond the UK as well?
We are definitely working across UK and Ireland. We've been invited into many conversations across Europe and the Middle East, but we have more advanced conversations in North America. So our ambition is to be placing 300 megawatts of compute capacity around the world. That's really driven by client demand, Joshua, as much as it is a strategy, but we will build where the clients need us to build, but always with heat reuse. So we've been invited to look at other locations, but if there's not an off-taking opportunity, we won't do it. So I think in 2026, 27, you will see a pipeline of non-UK data centers built with deep green philosophy.
It seems the idea is too good not to spread. When you look at even just how the directives in Europe are changing reporting, and the moment you have data center operators or REITs that have locations in Europe and in the US, and they want to standardize their platform. So it's like, okay, we're learning all of these great ideas about heat reuse that are working well in Europe, and we have dozens of facilities elsewhere, especially in the US. At what point is there more serious conversation about importing this technology and this innovation into one of the bigger markets?
Absolutely. I think that what we have learned, though, is that ESG and particularly the governance around data centers is the stick, and Deep Green would be quite positive about that being increasingly the case, that there is greater and greater governance and compliance around heat recapture and reuse. But it is actually the fact that this makes the compute cost efficient that is that's the carrot. And seemingly our clients are beginning to understand that. They do care about ESG very much, and some of them have incentives and objectives to deliver increasing efficiency, but often that is cost driven. And we've just begun to make that kind of conceptual link between why heat recapture is both beneficial from a cost perspective, but also from an environmental impact perspective. So yeah, you're absolutely right. If there are increasing regulatory conditions on what we measure and how we measure energy efficiency within the data center, that's a positive. But I think that people are driven by taking cost out as much, and the good thing is that we tick both boxes.
So as we get into more practical, tactical conversations around sales and marketing, and we start to look at the buyer personas, there's for sure some positioning and messaging for the ESG person, as well as for the CFO and the board.
Yeah, and you and I both know that sometimes ESG or sustainability is a adjacent part of the company, and sometimes it's incredibly integrated into the philosophy. The closer it is to core strategy, I think the simpler it is for everybody to see the benefit of a deep green compute data center. But we can satisfy all parties. It's cost effective. It creates operational efficiency, and it's a wonderful story. The social benefits are great stories that host clients are able to tell. OEMs and MSPs are able to tell. Everybody can bask in the warmth of a deep green story.
So, Matt, shifting gears, you're at a place in your career where I imagine from time to time, young people approach you looking for advice. And over the last 5 years, the digital infrastructure data centers are having a moment quite like no moment that's ever been in the history of this industry. So all of a sudden, they're in the mainstream media all the time.
Yeah.
If you were to be approached by the son or daughter of a neighbor or a coworker or niece or nephew, and they're in their teens, early 20s, they've heard about this growth that's going on in the space. They're not especially interested in a technical career. They don't see themselves being a software developer or an engineer. They're more interested in these client-facing roles. What would you talk about with that person over coffee or lunch when they're looking for advice on what they should be thinking about with career opportunities, how to prepare for that, and what the industry is going to look like a couple of years out from now?
Well, I think that sometimes people look at something like a data center and see a construction full of technology, possibly not particularly full of people, and that might be uninteresting. And actually, when you go behind the scenes in infrastructure, there are some incredibly powerful stories to be told. If we just keep this sort of within the scope of if people were approaching me around sales and marketing particularly, there are fascinating human stories to be told throughout our industry. As I said at the beginning, what I love about my job is it's related to climate, it's related to high performance compute and AI, it's about climate technology, it's about communities, it's about working with councils, it's about working with central government here in the UK, it is about working with communities. There's lots of different ways to find something interesting to do within the industry. It's not as simple as it's a shed in an industrial estate. There's much more to it. So for a person entering into the industry, I'm like, okay, find the interesting stories, find the human interest. That's what I think is appealing. So don't take it at face value, because as I go for dinner parties and things like that now, people go, what do you do? I could be embarrassed about saying that I work for a data center company. It doesn't seem particularly glamorous or exciting, but the reality is it can be really fascinating and important. So use curiosity, have curiosity to find the things that interest you within an industry which might seemingly be either pedestrian or banal.
That's a really interesting perspective, and it highlights this important area that's come up with go-to-market with marketing professionals in particular the last year or two, is that a significant part of their resources comes to recognizing that these community stakeholders, the elected officials, regulators, utility companies, even activists, are another kind of persona that you
Absolutely.
need to educate and build trust with. And traditionally, it was sponsoring a community fair, Little League, was all these branding types of efforts. But at the end of the day, there's a more complex need to educate and build trust with people in these roles, the same way you would educate and build trust with IT professionals and facilities professionals and digital infrastructure investors. And it increases the amount of different stakeholders that need to be in the fold.
Without a doubt. And I think that we have learned that those stakeholders are as important. Compute clients understand what this is. They will have very practical selection criteria for where they're going to put their colo capacity. Vendors understand it and see it as attractive. MSPs understand it. Intermediates, the channels all understand what this is and why it's interesting. But we can't neglect the communities that we arrive in. Because we are distributed and we are in the fabric of communities, we have a responsibility to involve them as stakeholders and to make long-term investments in those communities. We can't just turn up, build, and sort of leave. We have a responsibility to be good citizens. That's super exciting as well. I wrote a post today, Joshua, that said, I build stories. I don't tell stories. I have to do the work with my team and with all of Deep Green to build stories. It takes commitment. When they're good stories, they'll tell themselves. We've already seen that. We had a wonderful moment in the media sun, but that's as a consequence of building a good story. I believe that marketing, some forms of marketing, can be a tax on a really bad idea. And the worse the idea, or the less good an idea is, the more you're going to have to pay to market it. People would be astonished at how little actual dollar value we have placed in marketing. But what we did do was create a product that's super attractive and a good story to tell. But yeah, to your point, absolutely. And the wonderful thing is, I'll share some good news with you, Joshua. We have just announced today, in fact, the first larger data center build in the UK. And tomorrow, between you and I, don't tell anyone, but tomorrow I'll be publicizing the second. So now turning up, there's an English expression, which is these things turn up like buses. You wait half an hour for a bus and then two turn up at the same time. So these data centers are coming online. And what I love about that is that we now have permission to go and work with community stakeholders to bring to life some of the things that we wanted to do, which are peripheral to the data center. For example, generating what we call community hours, where people can access, say, the swimming pool when they may not be able to afford that access conventionally. So these are the stories that we're building in and around our core infrastructure. And, I'm absolutely delighted we'll now have the permission to do that.
Yeah, it's really interesting, as well as highlighting the importance of having a great product and a great value proposition as a way to avoid paying a very high marketing tax for having a very boring, undifferentiated product or service.
Yeah, I think, we will continue to evolve and hone our product market fit. We are a certain size, and so therefore a certain density. We seemingly are playing where the puck is going with AI and high performance compute, with high density workloads and high density racks. That is perfect for us because they create high heat, which means that we are able to contribute more to the environments that we're cohabiting with. So yeah, we have all the hard work ahead of us. I've forgotten the original question there.
Oh, just of having a great
exactly
value-driven narrative as a way to avoid having to pay a high tax on marketing for spreading in a commodity.
Yeah, we'll be tuning the value proposition, because clearly now we are dependent on client demand. But generally speaking, I think that clients are understanding why heat recapture and heat reuse is a very powerful proposition for them.
And as you move through achieving product market fit and move into go-to-market fit and channel partner market fit, a lot of this is figuring out how to enable your extended team members to be able to advance this narrative as well with their segments, with their stakeholders.
Absolutely. We have we need to be working with policymakers and central government, and so therefore we need to make sure that we're in those environments. That's a particular type. I wouldn't even call that marketing, nor would I necessarily just sort of simply call it lobbying, but we know what that is. We have a responsibility to try to influence the direction of travel in the countries that we operate in, as it pertains to supporting what people are trying to do in terms of infrastructure and future developments. We need to be working with partners like district heating network, people who build district heating networks. We need to be working with local councils or local state teams so that we're helping with, say, future energy strategies. So in that sense, it's not conventional marketing. It is about developing long-term strategic partnerships with the people who are actually going to integrate deep green into their communities. And then we have to help our clients understand why this is an opportunity for them. The good news is, Joshua, is that because of the, if we call it fame that we generated, it is quite straightforward for us to get a conversation with practically anyone. Whether we go in through a chief sustainability officer who will, 50% of people in the UK who are in those types of roles have heard of deep green. I often ask that question when I go into a presentation or whatever. I'll ask people to put their hands up if they've heard of us before I start to talk. And you'll be, it's actually quite a strong show of hands. I don't take that for granted. We have to continue to tell that story. And we have a responsibility to be working with CIOs and CTOs. But it's a two-way conversation. Also, we've got to listen as much as we tell. So yeah, it's exciting for all of us to be crystal clear about what our value proposition is and how we tell that. The other thing that's interesting, Joshua, you know this, branding and marketing, or whatever we'll call that, it extends into the way we build. It extends into the actual engineers who are building our data centers. It extends into the pitches that they make for contracts with us. We have a responsibility to make sure that we are thinking about every single nut and bolt, that we are trying to decarbonize practically everything, including the process of build. There would be a none too subtle irony if we were sort of not diligent throughout the entire design and build process. That's how you build brands. We have to care about the details. It's not simply the patina at the front end of a marketing campaign. We have a job to do to make sure that we're living and breathing the values that the company has. So that's really exciting. As we go into build now, these data centers here in the UK, we can begin to have questions about who are our partners and how do they behave as we build these sites.
So you're in a place in your career where you're fortunate to be working on something that you believe in very strongly, that has a really strong social good component, that solves many, many different problems for many different kinds of stakeholders. But you're also at a place in your career where there's probably quite a few colleagues that you work with in early days of technology companies who worked now for places that aren't quite focused on quite so much professional gratification, so much of a social mission. If you were to run into a former colleague that you were friendly with, that you worked with 5, 10, 15 years ago, you haven't seen them in a while, they want to catch up over breakfast or lunch, and you sense that they're kind of burned out and they're trying to figure out the next chapter in their career, what a career pivot might look like, what would you advise your friend to be thinking about with some of these client-facing roles in and around data centers?
So it's an excellent and quite existential question. What I love, Joshua, is that every day I get up and I know what the mission is. And its purpose, Deep Green's purpose, is very aligned to my own. I think that we are genuinely able to make a difference, a small difference, but it's not an insignificant difference, but it's a small difference to the challenges we face about economic prosperity versus climate, versus centralized strategies versus decentralized strategies. We're right at the heart of these incredibly seismic themes in society. That's incredibly motivating. If I met a colleague who was in a lesser position, I might support them as they reflect on, whether there's an opportunity to take a jump. I mean, if you find something, there is that adage, if you find something that you truly love, you never work another day in your life. I don't necessarily believe that. I think we have to work incredibly hard. But what I do know is when I wake up every morning, I know why I'm doing it. And I believe in the power of storytelling. I believe that people at the moment want hopeful stories. There's plenty of bad news, and we see that on a daily basis. But juxtapositioned with that is there's plenty of stories that are hopeful and positive and forward-facing and progressive. If you work for a company that is a part of that transition, then it's energizing. If you're not, then it's quite hard to be motivated. I wish that Deep Green were, capable of hiring a couple of hundred people so that more people could, enjoy what we're doing, and maybe that will happen in time.
Yeah, there are for sure some people who may even be former colleagues of yours that are working in, I don't want to say soul-crushing kinds of jobs, but they work for companies where they're publicly traded. The results have to be demonstrated in the next 4 weeks or they don't matter from a marketing and sales perspective. They don't have great differentiation. So a lot of selling colocation feels like selling co-working for servers, as if they're a co-working company just basically selling fractional real estate. So yeah, for sure, there is this certain kind of helping people figure out what's going to give them more meaning in their career.
Absolutely. I'm very fortunate we are a utility. Fundamentally, we provide a service to clients. We create a secure environment. We network that environment and we power that environment. And then they bring their computers to us. It's fundamentally a utility. But we have this powerful differentiator. And in order for that to be sustained, we have to take that heat and turn it into real stories. I have a responsibility now to increase the amount of access that people have to heated swimming pools here in the UK through charitable organizations. When clients are computing in our environment, we co-generate these tokens of value. I have a responsibility to distribute those because that's the fuel that will keep the story going. And as much as it has to be secure, reliable, fast, and cheap, we also have this wonderful additive part, which is, the power of heat recapture. To those colleagues who don't necessarily have that, I'm like, have the confidence to find really interesting companies and maybe take the leap. It's easy for me to say, but I've leapt several times. Anybody who looks at my career on LinkedIn will see that I didn't take a straight line route, and nor will I ever. If I'm uncomfortable, I don't settle. But I'm also, I know that is an incredibly privileged position I'm in.
It was interesting too when you're talking about growing swimming pools, and that brings up a whole different kind of stakeholder, potentially fitness advocates. With for example, in the US, there's a widespread narrative among healthcare and fitness professionals that if you can just get people to walk 30 minutes a day, 5 times a week, it does wonders for preventing a whole host of issues down the road. Are you in any conversations with any people that are like, well, we have these pools, they're very underutilized. We could potentially have 3,000 people a day using it, and there's currently 50 people a day using it. One of their biggest complaints has to do with potentially temperature availability, or just the culture of seeing swimming not just as recreational, but as fitness.
The answer is yes. So we have had conversations and have worked with Swim England, for example. That's an organization here in the UK that understands that there are physical and mental health benefits to pool access. There are other public spaces that we'll be also providing heat to, and industry and district heating systems and heating homes and businesses. There's an economic benefit to this, which is incredibly important to communities. But there is also the health benefit. And so that's what I mean by now we have to do the heavy lifting on that, Joshua. I can't just drop a modular data center outside a swimming pool and hope that the human factors happen automatically. That's going to take an effort. And so if that is what marketing is for Deep Green, that's what we will be doing. So connecting, for example, with local communities who may be able to create access for people who don't typically use swimming pools, whether that's for affordability or for other reasons. There's an organization, for example, here in the UK called Blacks Can't Swim. Now, I didn't brand that company, but it basically looks at a community of people for whom swimming may not be a natural pastime or health activity that they do. We will provide them with access to swimming pools. They will do all of the work to activate their local community in an authentic way. That's not my job. What I can do is pass on the enabler, which will be access to the pools. You know, that's the work that we have to do ahead of us. And it's exciting work. These are important projects. If, as a consequence of clients computing with high density AI, there is a better health outcome for a community where we place a data center, Joshua, that's what really matters. You know, that's what makes me sleep well at night.
Human resources and health insurance companies have thought of this as well over the last 5 or 10 years, where you see increasingly large employers, even smaller employers, willing to reimburse the cost of you joining a gym, or a health insurance company that's willing gladly to have a subsidized deal to make it more affordable for you to join a health club, to make fitness a daily part of your routine. So there's a lot of interesting stakeholders and a lot of interesting non-intuitive approaches to.
Absolutely. The easiest thing to do as a marketeer, it's not necessarily the cheapest, but one of the easiest thing to do is, and this is not a criticism of my friends in large OEMs, for example, but you can spend sort of £20 million putting a sticker on a Formula One car. And there's lots of benefits of doing that. It's a pretty straightforward story to tell. It's fast, it's agile, it's precise, it's all of these things. We all understand how the sort of the signaling works and the messages work when you brand, say, one of those types of assets. But there's also a massive opportunity here for those same OEMs and managed service providers or cloud service providers to be dedicating their compute capacity and their efforts to local communities with, for example, with health and well-being outcomes. So I'm not saying that it's instead of, but it's certainly as well as. And they are powerful human stories. That's why Deep Green became so well known so quickly, because people understood the connection between a new technology and something that is, pretty arcane, cold swimming pools. Now we can get into telling the stories of better health outcomes for populations of people. You know, who wouldn't want to be co-branding that?
Absolutely.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Matt, when you look at what's going on across the UK, across Europe, globally, what do you think is the biggest problem or challenge that the data center industry, the digital infrastructure ecosystem is facing? How is there some concept? Is there some idea? Is there some blocker that people are looking at that you wish they would think about a little bit differently?
Well, let's make it local, Joshua. We have spent time talking with people within UK government and about the approach to distributed compute and heat reuse. And it makes common sense philosophically, but the actual implementation of, say, economic zones in the UK, or the types of capacity that central government are buying, for example, seem to be in juxtaposition or counterintuitively being developed. So it's still very centralized, it's still hyperscale. And so there's this awkward tension between the possibility of heat reuse and its deployment into local communities, and a sort of a very Leviathan direction of travel. But slowly, a pool at a time, a district heating system at a time, local industries at a time, one by one, we will turn this around. It's just going to take time. That's my frustration, which is that we seemingly have a rhetoric that this is incredibly positive, but a behavior that's actually counterintuitive and counterproductive.
So even among district heating professionals, district heating leaders, this doesn't seem to be that strong of an interest in shaking things up.
No, I think the people who are the leaders of district heating networks absolutely understand the benefit of taking an energy source such as a data center and co-locating it with a district heating network and using one to prime the other. We make those systems more economically viable. We, particularly affect the delta between their cold state and their run state, and we make that more economically viable. So the more time we spend with district heating network providers, the more they want us to co-locate with them. That's comparatively straightforward to do in future developments. It's slightly harder to do retrospectively because you're building then into the fabric of something that already exists. But we're having many positive conversations here and in the US, in North America, with people who see this as exactly the right thing to do moving forward. We also talk, Joshua, about social license to operate. When a combination of infrastructure companies like district heating network providers and the data center company come together with an economic benefit to a local community, i.e. free heat that can be used as a substrate across an ecosystem. That's a lot of lingo in that sentence. But that gives us a license to develop. That is actually, it's not just marketing. It's not just BS. It's actually a material benefit to a community. So no, they totally get it.
The challenge too is there has to already be this infrastructure around district heating for that message to work. Like, for example, in the US, maybe the industry exists. It's just that something that's flown under my radar in the past. In the UK, this seems like it's a big deal, and through a lot of Europe, it also seems like it's a big deal that there's this whole parallel infrastructure to traditional utility companies, right?
Well, it's definitely prevalent in the Nordic countries, where they might suggest that about 25% of, say, for example, heating is done through district heating networks. So it is much more adopted there. In the UK, we're at about 5%. So there's still an awful lot of work to do, Joshua. It's much easier to do this in new developments. And it's less prevalent in the US. But I think that that's our job to do, which is to help people understand the economic benefits of turning up in a location, co-locating with a district heating network provider, and then creating these economic zones where adjacent businesses can benefit from what other people perceive as waste, but we perceive as usable energy.
I imagine in the coming months and in the coming years, as developers in the US continue to get pushback from communities, that approach will definitely pique the interest among local elected officials. But yeah, these are cultural issues, and governance issues and political issues, and yeah, it's complex.
It is, and there are different constraints in the US to the constraints that we have in the UK. We have limitations on space. There are challenges around energy generation and transmission. We have a different economy here. So yeah, I think the conversations will be nuanced market by market.
Yeah, and even in the US, there'd be 50 different decisions on how to approach this, depending on what state it is, with the pushback against whether this is national policy or executed or implemented by individual states.
But there may also be a slightly different behavior. Without either stereotyping or being too general, I think that there is a sort of like, build it fast, build it big. We might get to build as much capacity in the US, but faster. We will continue to build in the UK, but it takes time to go through the gates and processes of UK local and central policy. And that may be different in the US. So we may find that even though it might be nuanced state to state, that where there are states that are particularly positive about it, there will be expedited processes.
I mean, the closest parallel I can see is efforts over the years to try to deal with health insurance, where there's a strong recognition that if they could get greater economies of scale with health insurance across multiple states, yet the health insurance markets are all done on individual states. So yeah, getting through those barriers would probably be a significant hurdle to district heating taking off. But yeah, there's different priorities around sustainability on both sides of the pond.
Yeah, but we have advanced conversations in multiple states in the US, and I'm optimistic that in 2026 and 27 we'll be building.
Yeah, that's great. I'm looking forward to hearing more. Matt, when you think about the tactical parts of what you do on a daily basis, weekly basis with leading marketing and sustainability for Deep Green, and you think ahead with a 2, 3, 4-year time horizon, what do you envision changing in the coming years about your daily routine?
I think that we're a small team, Joshua, so there's only 10 of us. And if we think about 2025, 26, there may only be 20 of us. We're never going to be a large centralized team. We work with many partners with contracted specialists, and I think that will continue to be the case. I think that we're a double-sided business in so much as we have our heat partnerships, and we must manage those relationships because they are essentially joint ventures between ourselves and our heat hosts. And then we also have our clients, and we sell through intermediate channels. So we have to manage those relationships, and then we will have to manage our clients who are sort of whose other paper they might have contracted upon. We still have a responsibility to be working with them, particularly with things like ESG reporting and the wonderful stories that are being generated by the data centers. So from a day-to-day perspective, I think this will be less obviously recognizable as marketing, and it will be about relationship management across a sort of a spectrum of different stakeholders who will care about Deep Green. From a marketing perspective, we need to ensure that we have continued pipelines of demand, both from the host sides, where I think we'll have to be more strategic. So rather than retrospectively building, thinking about future builds, for example, district heating networks, as we've mentioned. But I also will have to work with the team to ensure that our clients continue to understand why our service is differentiating and of benefit to them. But it's not as if I come in every day and think I'm doing marketing. What I'm actually doing is trying to manage relationships across a broad landscape. So I think there'll just be more volume of that. We're going to have people who are working on our compute, or they are bringing their compute and doing work. They will need to be account managed. We'll have to manage our relationships with OEMs and MSPs. We'll have to manage our relationship with councils and central government. We'll have to manage our relationships with partners. I think the role of marketing will not be as much about making our brand famous as it will be about ensuring that we have amazing relationship management and customer experience. That's a very long answer to a short question.
So it almost seems like a more modern version to like channel partner enablement, where you're trying to make the different stakeholders, the OEM partners, the hosts, more successful in helping to grow your mutual interests?
Exactly. My job will be, in the main, helping field sales or pre-sales or sales enablement teams in OEMs and MSPs to be able to tell our stories on our behalf. So my sales team are thousands of people. They just happen to work for someone else. And I have to give them really succinct, clear materials that they can use, key messages. They then open the doors. We sell through that. I will always support them in sales, as the rest of the team will. It's not just myself. We will go and support sales pursuits and sales cycles or sales motions. But it's critically important that those teams of people are really clear about what our differentiator is. Otherwise, we're just another black box provider, and we lose our point of differentiation. It simply becomes a question of price. And as much as it is always a question of price, the value add must be really, really clear to them. But that's also a two-way street, Joshua. So they're also my research teams. They are going out to end clients, large enterprises, famous organizations, and asking the question about whether or not what we do is attractive. That's going to help us refine our product market fit. You know, if no one wants high density compute racks in a distributed environment, we'll stop building them. I don't think that's the case, by the way, but it's a two-way street. They're both our best researchers in the field, but they're also our sales channels. Is that marketing? I guess it is. It's kind of B2B, but I don't like those nomenclatures. I think when people say B2B, they think it's dull. We're still going to have an awful lot of fun.
What's interesting too with leaning on your partners to bring insights to you is historically in tech and SaaS in particular, a lot of times the argument for a direct sales force and hiring employees as opposed to hiring partners is getting closer to customers to be able to get that insight. It seems that what you're doing in your category is so unique and so differentiated that you're counting on leaning on your partners to be able to not only advance deals and opportunities, but to also be able to bring you that feedback that helps you to continue iterating.
Yes, and it'll be a collaboration. You know, very often we'll be with them in sales motions with their clients, so we'll be hearing the feedback live and directly. But we'll be able to feel the consequence of what we're doing with our partners in sales. Fundamentally, we have the dashboard we need, and it'll be sales of our capacity. But you know, we're doing this in partnership. Genuine partnerships mean that they are going to be giving us honest feedback about what it is that we're doing and whether they can sell it. That there's a benefit to them. Obviously, there's a margin that they're able to make selling our services, but they're going to be giving us real-time feedback.
Do you think of Deep Green as operating in a completely different category that doesn't clearly exist in other parts of the data center ecosystem? We kind of segment up the industry into data center operators. Clearly, Deep Green's has no interest in running a colocation facility. We think of data center technology companies that make switches and servers. We think of facilities related companies, power and cooling kind of companies. Clearly, Deep Green adjacent to that, but not really in that business. And then there's construction, there's real estate companies, there's investment companies. Where do you see Deep Green, or is Deep Green basically creating a new category?
No, I mean, we are a colo provider. You know, we design, build, and then operate co-location facilities. So in that sense, we are another part of that segment. What we do that is particularly different is the heat reuse, and we won't deviate from that. I think more of the people in the market will do it increasingly. You know, we have frenemies, let's call them that, Joshua, where we spend time with, I'm not going to name the brands, but we all know who we're talking about. And they have conversations with us about their future strategies for both their rack densities, their locations, and their cooling techniques, and the use of their heat reuse. If everybody copies what we're doing, then this will be the greatest success in a particular industry. That is what we would like, because it's the right thing to do for communities and the planet. The pie is big enough for us all to take a small slice of. So yeah, I think that if others mimic us, that would be wonderful. We need to remember what it is that we do that's unique. Is that defendable? No, it's not. We were just first mover, and we'll continue to do it. As you know, there's going to potentially be massive demand for compute, and that possibly outstrips supply. And I can't see that changing for the next 5 years. I think that's always going to be the case. As the demand for AI, as the use cases become practical realities, for some clients they are, but increasingly that will be the case. And I think the biggest question that people are going to have is, where is their compute? So I'm sure that there will always be an opportunity for deep green, but there's an opportunity for the rest of our types of industries to mimic what we're doing.
From a tactical perspective of what you work on daily, weekly basis, have you seen much impact for what you spend your time on because of AI in recent months? Has it impacted your personal tech stack that you use to run your part of Deep Green?
Oh, you mean in my work?
Yeah.
Yes, like everybody else, I have a platonic relationship with ChatGPT. When I used to do life drawing, Joshua, literally drawing, naked people, I was taught just to make a mark on the page. So there's nothing more intimidating than a blank sheet of paper. So you get a piece of charcoal and you just make a mess, and then you cut back into it and the form or the figure will begin to appear. I think that's what I use AI for. Like, if I don't understand a particular aspect of part of what we're doing, then ChatGPT is a useful starting position. But then it isn't the end result. I also have a virtual team, so I use agents. When I have time, sometimes I just get on with the job myself, but I also have a team of AI agents. So when we're planning a campaign, for example, that might be a combination of human and non-human intelligence. So yes, it impacts our daily lives. Image generation, I'm less of a fan of the output of Midjourney, but give it a year and there are remarkable things being created with video. I can't help but thinking that that may be a part of the playbook, but I am as interested and probably more interested in real human stories. So what I'm really looking forward to is, say, for example, when we cannot reduce and completely remove the carbon in our data centers and we do removals, I want to be able to be involved in those projects with local communities, and I want us to be able to film and record that. I don't want AI to generate that. I want it to be real. That's not because I'm a Luddite, Joshua. I just think that people will want human stories as much as they will want artificially generated stories and creative output. So yeah, the tools are here. They help us be incredibly productive, but they're not the be-all and end-all. I don't want automated relationships with partners. I want to have real conversations. I'd rather meet people face to face and eat donuts. There are things that it does which are wonderful, and that will continue to be the case. I think it will touch everyone's lives. If it hasn't already, it has, but it will continue to touch every aspect of my life. But as a marketing professional, I'm looking for authenticity, whether that's human generated or not. But I think I err on the side of telling human stories with humans.
Which plays really nicely into using your narrative to inspire others, using their experience in the field and helping to share their stories and positioning. There was this general idea in SaaS that people started talking about in the late 2010s of traditional marketing morphing into more of media companies for your most important buyer personas. And in a lot of ways, I think it got went in a little bit of different direction during the lockdowns in the early 2020s. I see that coming back now more than ever. The challenge is there's an enormous amount of resources that are still being spent on very, very traditional marketing and sales activities in this ecosystem. So the question is, does it change? Does it continue? Is there room for both? I don't know.
There will always be an opportunity in creating content and the distribution of that content in effective ways, whether that's, like, for example, programmatic content. these things will be continually a part of the marketing mix, I think. But what I'm going to do with our marketing dollars is invest in local community projects. Whether that's within the site as we build data centers, or it's peripheral to the site, for example, with removal projects, that's where we're going to be spending our money. And spending the money on projects that our partners care about and our clients care about, because what we've learned is then the story will tell itself. That these things will bubble up, then they become perpetuated stories that people share. People will share good stories. My job is to fuel and create inertia around what those stories are. As to us advertising and those types of, as you say, a media platform, I understand the philosophy, but I care about actually the material difference we can make to people's lives as a consequence of building a data center. The story will tell itself, if that makes sense.
So then a large part of your role is to think through where the next narrative is going to come from that helps support the mission beyond just the idea of the data center and the swimming pool.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
But not for the purposes of marketing, for the purposes of it being the right thing to do. Honestly, Joshua, if we spend, let's make up a figure, $100,000 doing a community project that no one ever hears about, that's fine. If it profoundly affects the community and it's a good use of money. So I'm not just doing these things because it perpetuates our brand in a kind of a marketing sense. But I'm doing these things, why we're all doing these things, why Deep Green does these things, is because they're the right things to do. If they then are stories that are discovered, and obviously we do have a responsibility to make sure that they can be discovered, but if they are discovered, their reach will be based on the integrity of the story.
So it's way beyond just a conversation about whether an event is helping to educate and build trust. That's kind of I talk with people a lot about that issue when they're deciding, should I invest another 100,000 in sponsoring a cocktail party at a large conference or a golf tournament or something? Does it educate and build trust? Well, it gets our brand out there. Does it educate people about what you do? Well, so it's the next level beyond that, is you're not just educating and building trust, you're enabling and inspiring.
Yeah. The first phase of what we did, Joshua, was we had events called Beyond Good, and we brought interesting speakers into a relatively small environment, not literally small, but what I mean is a small audience environment, and we filmed content. This stuff is on our website. People can see those, the consequential films that we created, and we may continue to do that. That is about educating ourselves as part of a community within our industry, whether the protagonist is a technologist or a climate specialist or an energy specialist or a technologist. It matters that we are creating a platform for understanding one another and distributing that content. We'll continue to do that. That is a good use of our time and our effort and our money. But in terms of advertising, I would much prefer that we're doing community impact projects. And then, as I say, those stories will tell themselves. But there is a role. A lot of people invite me to spend an awful lot of money at events, Joshua. Our industry is kind of built on an event or two a week. As you well know, these things can be remarkably expensive. I think that we will build both awareness and trust by building incredible data centers and heating local communities with the heat, as opposed to necessarily spending $50,000 on a stand. I'm not saying there's not a role for that, but that should be the last mile, not the first mile.
Yeah, agreed. One of my pet projects that I'm highlighting is in trying to inspire companies to host their own smaller events that are very, very targeted, very similar to what you previously described, because instead of 50,000 pounds or euros or dollars on a single stand, that's your budget for 10 or 20 of your own events over the course of the year, where you're inviting 10, 20, 30, 50 people at a time of the perfect audience. And instead of having to compete for attention with 200-300 other vendors at 100 other speakers, you have their undivided interactive attention to really make an impact in that 60 night. That's the breakfast seminar playbook, the lunch and learn playbook, the webinar series playbook. And it's such an order of magnitude difference in cost and investment that you can just take so many more at bats, so many more opportunities to get it right. I think a lot of companies don't feel empowered to do that. And part of what I'm trying to do in many cases is showcasing that not only is this possible, it may be the best path forward. I recently interviewed someone who moved from a smaller facility to a larger facility so they could increase the size of their conference room from holding 15 or 20 people up to 50 people, because the lunch and learn series was so powerful. And the cost difference of hosting it in their own facility versus going to a hotel or restaurant covered the entire cost of upgrading their office space.
Yeah, and I've previously, when I worked for, say, for example, when I worked for Dell, I used to run a community there, a community platform, and we might get 200 or 300 people at every 2 months. I would do an event. It was a huge community here in the UK, talking about customer experience design, UX, when these things were important in, say, 2008 and beyond, when we were building sort of enterprise websites, for example. So I've seen the power of these. They're not small activations; they're a different type of activation. To have conversations with a community of interest, I think, is very important. We will continue to do that, and we can host one of those events and film it and edit it and publish it for a couple of $1,000s. There are going to be times when we have conversations about the sort of the $25,000 stand, but as I said, it's not the first thing that's in the marketing mix.
Yeah, no, I agree. You need to,
and we don't do free swag, by the way, Joshua. So if anyone does come to a Deep Green event, I'm a big believer that if you do swag, make sure that the product is very sustainable and attractive, and people will use it forever. We don't need any more plastic bottles. Or maybe we do, but we need sustainable plastic bottles that people will, continue to use for months and years. So we're not going to be spending our marketing dollar on a lot of bad swag either. Just before I get bombarded with people who want me to buy pens and pads.
If you do Deep Green well enough, over time, the swag should be taking a selfie with you and or Mark at your booth.
No, I mean, I don't think Mark would particularly enjoy that, and nor do I. I think the very best thing that could happen as a consequence of Deep Green's success is that people come and tell me that their kids have learned to swim in a swimming pool that we heated, or that their homes or their parents' homes are being heated with Deep Green heat, and that they know that that is actually happening. That for me is the take home that I really care about.
And if you start young enough, you'll solve the career problem as well. There's so many of these grassroots movements of, oh no, all the baby boomers are retiring. Where's the next generation of talent going to come from? And everyone's starting with the high schools. And having my own kids that just went through this in the last 10, 15 years, no, there's career preferences that are starting with kids as young as 8 or 10. When they get to junior high school, when they get to intermediate level, when they get to middle school, and there's these different academies around healthcare and technology and culinary and hospitality. And it's starting younger and younger. If you really want to capture the attention of boys and girls, it's starting at a younger, much, much younger age than I think many people appreciate. Yeah.
And I think that, we do have to help people appreciate infrastructure. It surrounds us. It's the lived environment. And I think that we share a responsibility to help people understand how that works, and sometimes how it doesn't work, and also see the opportunity in it. It can be incredibly exciting to be involved in the refabricating of communities, but it might not be immediately obvious. Data centers might be perceived as big sheds with lots of computers screaming at each other and not a particularly interested in employment opportunity. But that's not my experience of it. We do spend a little bit of time going into colleges and universities here in the UK, Joshua, and I think as we start to build into communities, we will be spending time in schools and inviting those schools to understand what it is that we're doing, and part of those stories, so that we do inspire people who may consider a career in what I perceive to be climate technology. It's not going out of fashion. I mean, there are going to be jobs in climate tech for the foreseeable future, right? We have a big job to do. It's quite urgent, but it can also be very exciting.
There's all these mini journeys you talk about from a marketing and sales perspective, getting in early enough in that awareness and consideration stage where you're in a position to impact the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the options. What if all of these were just journeys, that the journey to figuring out what is the pain, what is the challenge, what's the frustration that starts someone on a path to realizing that they have a climate issue, that they have a cost of heating issue, that there's a fitness issue. All of these is really understanding the earliest point that leads to someone having interest.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I also would hope that we can help people reframe these things as opportunities. We have a climate emergency and it creates an opportunity. We have to think and build our way out of this. Part of that will be what AI helps us do, but it's not going to solve the problem without us prompting it, right? So that is an opportunity. Infrastructure is a challenge, but it is also an opportunity. So I think that if we can help ensure that people see the opportunities in all of this. When we talk about crisis and problems, sometimes that means that it creates an impotence. People are kind of resistant to it, and it doesn't sound like it's going to be an awful lot of fun. When we reframe this as an opportunity, like data centers are going to be built. They're either going to be built well or they're going to be built less well. Last week I was at a conference and somebody said, "Aren't you just part of the problem?" And I said, "Well, you could suggest that's the case, but I hope to be part of the solution. The reality is they're going to be built anyway. So which do you want, good ones or less good ones?" If we reframe this as an opportunity, I think it can be really inspiring for people. I was at a university last week. It's a famous university in the UK called Goldsmiths. And some of the questions that these young postgrads were asking were phenomenal questions, difficult to answer. But they were inspiring questions. There was real enthusiasm and excitement. And it was an opportunity for me to express upon them that they just have to take their moonshots. Like, don't be limited by, if we had thought conventionally, if we had behaved conventionally, we would not be building data centers, Joshua, in the UK right now. We wouldn't have signed off 2 this week for build. Helping people be confident, and to be confident, you need to, generate energy, and that comes from opportunity. The climate and AI and geopolitics, while oppressive in some cases, is actually an opportunity for innovation, new thinking, new communities, new conversations. If our legacy is to inspire people to see that, then we've done a good job at Deep Green.
That's the end goal.
Ultimately, like you, I have a family. One of my daughters is an illustrator. Imagine the world that she faces. She's being used, she's using conventional analog tools to learn her trade. But a massive aspect of her future is going to be the augmentation of what she does into virtual environments and artificial intelligence. These things are inevitable in her career. But there's an opportunity in that. And my other daughter is going into climate and wants to, study climate and then be involved in it. And that is a wonderful opportunity. If Deep Green is an exemplar and people can see it as a beacon of, you can do things differently, you can think differently, you can execute differently, and you will find the coalition of the willing in councils, in central government, in OEMs, in partners, with engineers and build people, all of these partners, you will find coalition of the willing. If our legacy is to ensure that the next generations believe that's true, then that's a job well done, I think.
Absolutely. Matt, if someone wants to learn more about what you're doing or reach out to you, is LinkedIn the best place to learn more about what you're working on?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. I don't know whether you put email addresses in show notes, Joshua, but I'm very happy for my email address to go there. So either email or LinkedIn. I will always try to find time to answer questions and have conversations with people. I'm not sure that I can field tens of thousands of them, but I will do my very best because I love what I do. I'm very fortunate. I hope that it inspires people, and if they have questions, then they should get in touch. If they think that they've got a product that they want to sell me that optimizes my marketing channels, maybe they could just not send me any email. I get sort of about 50 of those a day, and I'm always very polite, but I'm unlikely to necessarily procure those services. I'm just being transparent. But if there are people who are interested in what we're achieving and what we're aiming to achieve, whether it's part of their studies, for example, or they have a question and I can help provide an answer, then I'll definitely do it. And if I can't answer the question, Joshua, I work with people who probably can.
We have a fair amount of viewership in the managed service provider and in the OEM space as well. So yeah, those probably be some of the more curious people to learn more about what you're doing. Is Deep Green's website the best place for someone to go to learn about Deep Green, or a LinkedIn page? Or
The next website is in design and development right now. The Deep Green website is a thin layer. I designed it. I don't think it's the best website in the world. The next one is better. But if a partner, an OEM, an MSP really wants to understand what Deep Green is doing, then they can get in touch and we can spend 15, 30 minutes on a call, and we can go through it in more detail. And I'd welcome those opportunities. But every conversation is an opportunity.
So yeah, we'll be sure to include the LinkedIn and the URLs in the blog and in the show notes as well. And I think just watching this and perhaps watching Mark Bjornskot's interview as well will give someone a pretty good feel for what's unique about what you're working on and who would be ideally suited to partner with Deep Green. But this has been fantastic.
Mark is I mean, he has an amazing mind. He doesn't like labels, and he certainly doesn't like labels like innovative or sort of innovator necessarily. But he has a genius mind. It is a privilege to work alongside him and the rest of the team. I'm surrounded by very, very talented people. But yeah, I definitely recommend watching Mark's video because it's inspiring.
Yeah, as well. And even the idea of you hosting your own events to explain what you're working on in front of a studio audience is also really, really a big, big help to understand what you're working on.
Yeah, they're kind of like little TEDx's. TED is a wonderful platform. TEDx is a wonderful platform. I'd like to have those engaging conversations, and they'll continue to happen. So if people are in the UK, they're very welcome to come to those events. So go onto our website and subscribe. I'm not going to spam you. I don't have time to create lots of spam email, but I will send out invites. And also, if you can't make the event or you're not located in the UK, it's not convenient, then obviously there are videos online. And I'm looking forward to sort of series 2. Let's call it season 2. Season 1 was kind of a prototype. We had some great conversations. We will have, I'm sure, half a dozen further conversations this year. And I'm really looking forward to getting some exciting protagonists and learning. That's what I love about my job, Josh. Every day is a school day.
Audience feedback.
Yeah, then we switch the cameras off and then we have a conversation. And people can ask hard questions, and it's not that it's Deep Green providing the answers. It is a 30 or 40 people having conversations about things that matter, and we're all taking away new information from those experiences.
Well, Matt, I appreciate you sharing so generously today about your career advice, how you think about Deep Green's narrative, its role in the bigger ecosystem, who you partner with, and where you're thinking about the company's growth in the coming months and in the coming years. This has been really, really fascinating, and I'm looking forward to sharing this with our audience.
Joshua, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you for good questions and an engaging conversation. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure as well. I've been speaking with Matt Bagwell, who is the Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Sustainability Officer for Deep Green in the UK. Thanks again, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Enjoy the rest of your day, Joshua. Thank you very much.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.